how to adjust your slope of shoulder if you don't have a shoulder seam on your shoulder. I got a question from a member in my Facebook group this week wondering how to adjust the slope of the shoulder by picking it up here because she needed more slope, but she didn't have a shoulder seam on her shoulder. So she's working with a pattern that has a back yoke, and the back yoke comes forward of the shoulder, so the seam is sitting, about here. So the first thing I want to show you is I have a basic bodice pattern here in front of me. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you how a back yoke is drafted, and then I'm going to talk about the shoulder seam and how it really doesn't need to be in the center of your shoulder. So here's a back and a front. I'm going to move the front away for a minute here, and I'm just going to decide how deep I want my back yoke to be, and I'm going to draw myself a horizontal line here. So you can already imagine that if this were a bodice and the yoke and the back of the rest of the bodice were sewn together, that would be the back yoke, that would be the lower part of the back. So I'm going to cut this here. Okay, and then you would add seam allowance to the cut edges. So here is your back yoke. Now I'm not finished yet because sometimes, like I said, a back yoke comes forward of the shoulder. So sometimes the back yoke may in fact have a seam at the shoulder, but sometimes the shoulder seam is forward. So I'm just going to go ahead and make my 1/2 inch seam allowances here, like this. And I think I'm going to cut one off. I'm going to cut the back one off. I'm just going to trim this little thing away here so it doesn't stick out. And then I'm just going to tape this together. All right, so you can see now what I have is the back yoke and the shoulder seams put together as if I had sewn them together. Let me just turn this right side up so you can see. Here's my front, here's my back yoke. So now at this point I could decide, okay, I'm going to have my back yoke come, forward of the center of my shoulder. So I'm going to go ahead and draw myself a new line here, okay, and I'm going to tape this a little bit better, like this. All right. And just for tidiness purposes, I'm just going to clean this up so it looks nice and neat. Then I'm going to cut here. All right, so now you can see what we have is a front that part of it is attached to the back yoke. And this is very typical for back yokes. They tend to come forward and sit forward. If you put your fit muslin on and the back yoke is peeking up at the tip of your shoulders, that means you have to take that up. Now you can do a few different things here. You could take it off at the actual seam between the back yoke and the front pattern. What I would do is I would measure what I needed, like this, what I needed to pick up, and then I would go back to 0 and I would cut that off. Okay, so when you sew it back together, you're losing that extra length here, which will pull the tip of the shoulder down. Now, if you want to get right in there and actually remove it on the center of your shoulder, you could pin up the amount you need across the center of your shoulder on the fit muslin. Okay, so just pin it up, and then where it's pinned on your muslin, you could cut, and I'm just gonna make it in a slightly different spot so I'm not just cutting apart what I just did. So basically what I could do here is I could say, all right, on this line where my center of my shoulder is, I need to pick up the shoulder here. So I'm going to go ahead and mark how much that was. So let's say it was this much, and I'm just going to go ahead and make myself like a dart, right? So here is how much I need to pick up. So I would cut one, pivoting at the neckline, and slide that down. So you can see what we've done here is we've removed the amount here, and then when we sew it back together later, it will be shortened here, and that's the same thing as, shortening shortening it on the two pieces and sewing it together. The fabric doesn't know, or it doesn't rely on the fact that there's a seam here to create that shape. It's about the measurement here versus the measurement here. And if you have to pick this up, you can remove the fabric within a pattern piece like I did here on the back yoke. And I'm just gonna show you, so I basically, overlapped this, right? So basically that would be doing the same thing. And then when you sew the back yoke onto the front at the shoulder seam, which is sitting forward, you have essentially also adjusted the slope of your shoulder. So I thought this is a fun look. Sometimes, I share something like, how to adjust the slope of the shoulder, and then we get into a scenario where there isn't a shoulder seam. And I thought this was fun just to show that you could either, mark on the pattern where your shoulder is, adjust it there, or you could adjust it at the seam that's sitting a little bit forward. So those are the two options you have for adjusting the slope of the shoulder if you're working with a pattern that has a seam that's sitting forward of the shoulder. And I just want to point out that shoulder seams are style lines. They can be on the center of your shoulder. That's the traditional thing. And if that is how the pattern is designed to be, then you want to adjust your pattern so the shoulder seam is sitting on the center of your shoulder. But if the shoulder is more forward or if it's at an angle, that's okay too. That's a design choice. So I just think this is fun to look at. And if you have any questions about, adjusting the slope of your shoulder on a pattern that doesn't have a traditional shoulder seam, please post those below and I will help you. If you're enjoying my content, consider liking and subscribing to my channel because it helps me grow. And I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their day.